Tonight we stand upon the wide, breathing banks of the Euphrates, where the evening light falls copper over the plain, and the river moves like a long memory through the dust of the world. Somewhere beneath the soil of modern Iraq, beneath the broken brick, the ruined thresholds, the scattered tablets, the ash, the silt, the fingerprints of forgotten masons, there lies a city whose name has never truly died. Babylon! Even now the word carries weight. It rises in the mind like a tower against the sun. It summons images of walls so vast that ancient travelers wondered if human hands had truly raised them. Gates clad in blue, lions striding in glazed brick, temples where incense drifted upward into the dark, and priests searched the heavens for warnings written in the wandering paths of stars. It was a city of kings and scribes, of merchants and judges, of soldiers and astrologers, of canal diggers, brewers, bakers, slaves, mothers, children, and gods. And yet, in the beginning, it was mud, mud from the river, mud shaped by hand, mud pressed into brick beneath the burning Mesopotamian sun, mud stacked into walls, temples, houses, courts, storerooms, and palaces. From the simplest substance of the floodplain, an entire world was built, a world of law, a world of calculation, a world where men and women scratched signs into wet clay, and by doing so, somehow refused to vanish. Around 1800 B.C., Babylon was not yet the impossible wonder it would become in later centuries. It was not yet the city of Nebuchadnezzar, not yet the Babylon of towering imperial legend, not yet the place that would haunt prophets, conquerors, poets, and archaeologists for thousands of years. But already something extraordinary was happening here. Already the city was drawing power toward itself, like a flame drawing insects from the dark. Its position was no accident. The Euphrates curved through the land like an artery, feeding canals, orchards, fields, docks, and workshops. Boats came and went, heavy with grain, wool, timber, metal, oil, and stone. Traders arrived, speaking the tongues of distant towns. Officials counted loads, sealed jars, measured land, recorded debts, and watched the movement of silver. Somewhere in the scribal houses, young students bent over clay tablets, repeating signs until the signs became thought itself. This was not a primitive world. That is the first illusion we must cast aside. The people of Babylon were not shadows stumbling through the dawn of history. They were our intellectual equals, living beneath different skies, governed by different fears, asking different questions, but no less alert to the mysteries of existence. They measured time. They argued over property. They feared injustice. They loved their children. They buried their dead. They watched drought and flood with the anxious eyes of people who knew that civilization was never guaranteed. In their world, the divine was not distant. The gods were present in the city, in the temple, in the statue, in the storm, in the river's rise, in the king's success, in the failure of the harvest, in the strange birth of an animal, in the shape of smoke, in the liver of a sacrificed sheep, and in the stars that wheeled silently above the plain. Mortals and gods did not occupy separate universes. They lived in a single charged landscape, woven together through ritual, fear, duty, and power. To walk into Babylon in the age of Hammurabi would have been to enter a machine of human ambition, but also a sacred organism. The streets were not merely streets. They were channels of movement, commerce, gossip, processions, and authority. The temples were not simply places of worship. They were economic engines, political centers, storehouses, employers, and gateways between the seen and unseen worlds. The palace was not merely the house of a ruler. It was the nerve center of judgment, taxation, diplomacy, punishment, and war. At the center of this rising world stood Hammurabi, king of Babylon, a ruler whose name would cross the centuries because of stone, law, and memory. His famous code was not the first law code in history, nor was it a declaration of equality in the modern sense. It was sterner, stranger, more hierarchical, and more ancient than that. But it reveals a city and a kingdom obsessed with order, a world where disputes over wages, fields, marriage, injury, debt, trade, adoption, inheritance, and murder had to be pulled into a structure that could survive beyond one man's anger. Here, justice was carved into the language of power. Here, the king presented himself as the shepherd of the people, chosen by the gods to prevent the strong from devouring the weak. Yet, as ever in the ancient world, beneath the noble words lay a harder reality. Status mattered, wealth mattered, gender mattered, slavery mattered. The law protected, but it also ranked. It restrained violence, but it also authorized it. It promised order, but order always came at a price. This is the paradox of Babylon. It was advanced, but not gentle, brilliant, but brutal, organized, but fragile, sacred, but deeply political. It could calculate, legislate, trade, irrigate, build, and record with astonishing sophistication, and still remain at the mercy of flood, famine, invasion, disease, rebellion, and the unpredictable will of kings. Tonight we will enter that paradox. We will walk through the mud-brick streets at sunrise, when ovens smoke and donkeys bray and the smell of bread, dung, river water, sesame oil, and dust hangs in the air. We will listen for the reed stylus pressing into clay. We will stand in the shadow of temple walls and ask what kind of mind first imagined a city as the meeting place of heaven and earth. We will look at tablets pulled from the soil by stratigraphic excavation, at broken seals, legal contracts, foundation deposits, and the silent evidence of radiocarbon dating, lithic analysis, ceramic sequences, and historical reconstruction. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. For all the tablets recovered, countless voices are gone. For every king whose name survives, thousands lived and died unnamed. Their houses collapsed, their bones returned to dust. Their words were never written. Their griefs, bargains, jokes, prayers, and private terrors have drifted beyond reach, leaving us answerless, adrift to ponder the shape of vanished lives. And so we begin not with certainty, but with wonder. Was Babylon the most advanced city of the ancient world? Or is that question too small for what it became? Perhaps Babylon was something deeper than a city of walls and laws. Perhaps it was one of humanity's great experiments in living together at scale, an attempt to turn river mud into permanence, divine command into government, memory into writing, and fear into order. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And wherever you are watching from, post your location and your local time, because tonight, across the long road of human history, we are all gathering at the gates of Babylon, The Euphrates did not simply pass by Babylon, it made Babylon possible. Long before baked brick law courts, royal inscriptions, temple economies, and the ambitions of kings, there was the river, sliding through the southern plain with the slow authority of something older than memory. It came down from the highlands far to the north and west, carrying water, silt, fish, reeds, boats, stories, and danger. In spring it could swell with life. In anger it could break its banks, drown fields, tear away huts, and leave behind a shining skin of mud from which new harvests might rise. To the people who lived along its banks, the Euphrates was never merely water. It was a road, a boundary, a granary, a threat, and a God-haunted force. Its channels shifted, its floods had moods, its silences could be terrifying. A low river meant cracked soil, hunger, arguments at canal gates, and prayers whispered into the heated air. A river too high meant destruction, disease, and bodies carried downstream beneath a sky full of birds. This was the first great truth of Mesopotamia. Civilization here was not born in a forgiving land. There were no deep forests standing close at hand, no easy mountains full of stone, no generous rains falling reliably across the year. The southern alluvium was flat, exposed, and often punishing, a land where the horizon could seem endless, and the sun could hammer the plain until the world shimmered. Yet within that hardship lay an extraordinary opportunity. With canals, levees, ditches, embankments, and coordinated labor, the dry earth could be made to bloom. Barley could grow, date palms could rise, herds could graze, villages could thicken into towns, towns could be pulled into kingdoms. This was not magic, it was engineering. The canal was one of the great inventions of the ancient world, as important in its own way as the wheel, the plow, or writing. A canal was a promise made against chaos. It required digging, cleaning, repairing, measuring, defending, and arguing. It demanded cooperation, but it also created power. Whoever controlled water controlled life. Whoever could assign labor, settle disputes, and decide which field drank first possessed something more than authority. They possessed the practical means by which society survived. In the age when Babylon began its climb toward greatness, the landscape around it was a web of human intervention. Fields stretched outward in ordered plots. Dikes held back water. Channels fed orchards. Small settlements clustered where cultivation could be sustained. Boats moved along river and canal alike, carrying loads that would have been impossible to move so efficiently over land. Grain from the countryside could be gathered, counted, stored, taxed, and redistributed. Clay tablets recorded deliveries, loans, labor obligations, and the endless flow of goods that made the city more than a crowd of houses. The river gave Babylon reach. A farmer upstream might never see the palace, yet his grain could still enter its system. A trader from another city might arrive by boat with textiles, timber, stone, or metal, and leave with silver, wool, dates, or promises written into clay. Messages could travel. Officials could be dispatched. Soldiers could be supplied. Shrines could receive offerings from lands beyond the immediate fields. The city's stomach was not limited to what could be grown beneath its walls. It could feed upon a wider landscape, and as it fed, it grew. But the Euphrates also demanded knowledge. The Babylonians watched water with an attention born of necessity. They observed seasons, flow, soil, salinity, crop failure, and the relationship between labor and yield. They learned that the earth could turn against them if irrigation was careless. Water brought fertility, but it could also bring salt in the lowest lands, where drainage failed and evaporation was fierce. Salts could gather in the soil, slowly whitening the surface, weakening crops, and placing invisible pressure upon the agricultural foundations of the world. Here the archaeological record becomes a quieter witness, not always dramatic, not always golden. Sometimes it speaks through seed remains, field systems, canal traces, sediments, administrative tablets, ceramic distributions, and the patient labor of environmental reconstruction. Stratigraphic excavation does not merely uncover palaces, it uncovers episodes of occupation, abandonment, repair, burning, rebuilding, and flood. It reveals how human beings returned again and again to the same vulnerable places, because the reward was too great to ignore. Babylon's rise was therefore not a simple story of kings commanding history into being. It was a story of landscape and labor braided together. The king could declare himself chosen by the gods, but he still needed canals cleared. The temple could receive offerings, but it still needed fields watered. The merchant could dream of profit, but he still needed boats, contracts, guards, and ports. The scribe could press perfect wedges into clay, but the clay itself came from the river's world. Everything returned to the Euphrates. Imagine dawn on its banks around 1800 B.C. The air is still cool for a little while. A pale mist lifts from the water. Men stand calf-deep near the shore, pushing boats out with poles. Women move toward the river with jars. Donkeys wait with lowered heads. Fishermen check traps. A child watches the current and sees, perhaps not geography, but power. Across the water, the mud-brick city catches the first light. Walls glow amber. Smoke begins to rise. Somewhere a temple door opens. Somewhere a clerk unseals a storeroom. Somewhere a dispute begins over water, wages, or land. The day has barely started, and already the city is alive with dependence. This dependence gave Babylon both strength and weakness. It allowed population, specialization, administration, and wealth. It allowed people to become scribes rather than farmers, potters rather than herders, priests rather than canal diggers, judges rather than fishermen. It allowed the human mind to branch into professions, institutions, and systems. Yet it also meant that failure could travel quickly through the body of society. A damaged canal could mean hunger. A broken levee could mean ruin. A bad harvest could mean debt. Debt could mean servitude. Servitude could mean flight, rebellion, or despair. The river made order necessary. Perhaps this is why Mesopotamian civilization feels so intensely organized, so profoundly concerned with lists, measures, contracts, boundaries, taxes, rations, and law. The environment itself punished vagueness. Water had to be directed. Grain had to be counted. Labor had to be summoned. Land had to be surveyed. Debts had to be remembered. Promises had to be witnessed. In such a world, writing was not an ornament of civilization. It was one of civilization's load-bearing walls. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden in the silt. We do not know the names of most who dug those canals, patched those banks, poled those boats, or watched their fields fail beneath a white crust of salt. We do not know what songs they sang while working, what curses they muttered when officials came to count their grain, what private bargains they made with the river in seasons of fear. Archaeology gives us traces. Genomic data may reveal movements of people. Radiocarbon dating can anchor samples in time. Soil analysis can whisper of flood and drought, but the full inner life of the river world remains beyond reach. And yet, the outline is unmistakable. Babylon did not rise because the land was easy. It rose because human beings learned to negotiate with difficulty. They made a harsh floodplain productive through calculation, compulsion, ritual, and astonishing persistence. They turned water into grain, grain into surplus, surplus into hierarchy, hierarchy into law, and law into the architecture of the state. The Euphrates was the city's first wall, first road, first teacher, and first judge. Its waters carried life toward Babylon. Its moods shaped Babylon's fears. Its banks drew together laborers, merchants, priests, farmers, scribes, and kings into one immense human experiment upon the plain. A river moved through the desert, and beside it, a city began to dream of ruling the world. A city begins as an idea before it becomes a skyline. For Babylon, that idea was pressed first into the most ordinary substance imaginable. Clay. Clay underfoot after the flood withdrew. Clay sticking to ankles at the river edge. Clay gathered, kneaded, shaped, stamped, dried, stacked, broken, reused, and returned at last to earth. There is something almost impossible in this, that one of the most famous cities in human memory rose not from marble or granite, not from cliffs of limestone or cedar forests, but from mud made obedient by hands. Mud brick was the flesh of Babylon. It formed the house wall and the temple platform, the granary, the courtyard, the workshop, the oven, the drain, the narrow lane, and the threshold polished by generations of passing feet. It was humble, but it was also revolutionary. In a land where stone was scarce and timber precious, clay allowed construction at scale. The river and plain supplied the material. The sun supplied the kiln for unbaked bricks. Human labor supplied the rhythm. Brick after brick, course after course, layer upon layer, the settlement thickened. To modern eyes, mud brick can seem temporary. We imagine it melting beneath rain, crumbling beneath time, vanishing into brown heaps without elegance. But to the ancient builders of Mesopotamia, mud brick was possibility. It could be made quickly. It could be standardized. It could be repaired. It could be remade from ruins. It could build low homes and vast raised platforms alike. It gave architecture to a flat land that otherwise offered few natural monuments. This is one of the deep secrets of Babylon's greatness. The city was not imposed upon the landscape as a foreign thing. It was made out of the landscape itself. A brickmaker at dawn might begin with wet clay, mixed with chopped straw or chaff, the fibers helping bind the mass together. The mixture would be pushed into rectangular molds, smoothed, lifted free, and left beneath the blazing sun. Rows of bricks lay across open ground like sleeping animals. The work was repetitive, back-breaking, and essential. Without the brickmaker, no palace rose. Without the carrier, no wall climbed. Without the mason, no room enclosed the human world against heat, dust, thief, and storm. Sometimes bricks bore stamps, royal names, claims, boasts, prayers. A king could place his identity into the building material of the city, multiplying himself across walls and foundations. In later centuries, rulers would do this on a monumental scale, but the logic was already ancient. To build was to rule. To rebuild was to restore cosmic order. To stamp one's name into brick was to whisper to the future, "I was here, and I commanded this." Yet the metropolis was not only its great buildings. Its power lived in arrangement. Streets had to connect houses to markets, gates to temples, docks to storehouses, neighborhoods to wells and canals. Courtyards brought light into domestic spaces. Roofs provided sleeping places in hot seasons. Doorways mediated public and private life. Drains carried away wastewater. Ovens smoked. Animals moved through lanes. Walls leaned and were repaired. Rooms were subdivided. Old houses were rebuilt on top of older houses, slowly raising the level of the city through time. This is why excavation in Mesopotamia is often excavation through accumulated human persistence. A tell is not a hill in the usual sense. It is a mound of lives. It forms when generations build, collapse, level, and build again in the same place. A city becomes vertical memory. Beneath one floor lies another floor. Beneath a courtyard, perhaps an older wall. Beneath that, another surface where someone once swept dust from a doorway, cooked a meal, stored a jar, or sat in shade, listening to the distant sound of animals and argument. Stratigraphic excavation enters such a mound like a slow conversation with time. Each layer must be read carefully. A burnt surface may mark destruction or accident. A sealed deposit may preserve a moment of abandonment. A change in pottery style may reveal shifting habits, trade links, or chronology. A foundation trench may cut through older occupation. A humble drain may tell us more about everyday urban planning than a royal inscription full of divine praise. Babylon's earliest growth must be imagined through this deep layering of material and intention. Its houses were not placed randomly like tents upon open ground. They belonged to a social organism that demanded repetition, boundaries, inheritance, property, and memory. A wall divided one household from another. A doorway gave access, but also controlled it. A storeroom indicated surplus. A sealed jar indicated ownership. A tablet recording a transaction indicated trust had become too complex for memory alone. The city was becoming a machine of relationships. Mud brick architecture made density possible, but density created new problems. People living closely together must negotiate noise, smell, waste, water, animals, fire, crime, family conflict, and debt. They must share walls, lanes, drainage channels, and obligations. They must know where they belong within the visible and invisible maps of the city. Who owns this room? Who may enter this courtyard? Who repairs this wall? Who pays when a roof collapses? Who has the right to draw water first? Who witnesses the sale of a house? Who remembers the boundary when the elders die? The answer, more and more, was administration. The city's physical form and its written culture grew together. Clay built the walls, and clay preserved the words. The same earth that became brick also became tablet. Wet clay received the sharp edge of the reed stylus, holding numbers, names, commodities, contracts, judgments, letters, school exercises, hymns, omens, and calculations. In this sense, Babylon was doubly made of clay. Its body was mud brick. Its memory was cuneiform. There is a strange beauty in that. A modern city often hides its systems behind glass, steel, wires, asphalt, and screens. Babylon's systems were more tactile. A hand pressed a seal into clay to close a jar or authorize a document. A scribe pushed wedges into a tablet that would dry and harden. A builder lifted bricks still warm from the sun. A potter turned clay into vessels. A child may have learned the first signs by copying them into a small tablet held in the palm. The entire civilization seemed to emerge from the meeting of hand, earth, water, and heat. And yet the city was never merely practical. Even the humblest materials could be drawn into sacred order. Foundations might receive offerings. Temples rose upon platforms that separated divine space from ordinary ground. Processional routes could transform streets into ritual corridors. A wall could be both military defense and cosmic boundary. The layout of sacred districts gave shape to the relationship between heaven, earth, king, and people. The city was not only where humans lived, it was where the world was arranged. Babylon's transformation from mud brick settlement into metropolis was therefore both physical and mental. It required construction, but also imagination. Someone had to believe that the labor was worth organizing. Someone had to count workers, assign rations, gather materials, settle disputes, and plan beyond a single season. Someone had to see in flat earth the possibility of gates, courts, storehouses, shrines, workshops, and walls. Someone had to understand that a city is not just a place where many people gather. It is a system for making strangers depend upon one another. This dependence is the true architecture beneath the visible architecture. A farmer outside the city needed the urban market. A merchant needed secure storage and enforceable contracts. A priest needed offerings and labor. A ruler needed taxes, soldiers, scribes, and legitimacy. A craft worker needed customers and raw materials. A household needed inheritance rules, marriage arrangements, and protection. The city tied them all together in a web stronger than any single wall. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden beneath the collapsed brick. We can map walls, measure rooms, compare ceramics, analyze sediments, and study tablet archives. We can reconstruct building phases and identify destruction layers. We can trace the movement of goods and the expansion of neighborhoods. But the first dream of Babylon, the moment when a river settlement began to imagine itself as something greater, remains beyond our reach. No tablet preserves the thought of the first planner who looked across the plain and saw not mud, but destiny. Perhaps there was no single moment. Perhaps cities are not born in thunder, but in repetition. One more house, one more wall, one more canal, one more market day, one more tablet recording, one more debt, one more shrine repaired after flood damage, one more family deciding not to leave. Gradually, the settlement becomes necessary. Gradually, the necessary becomes powerful. Gradually, the powerful becomes sacred. And then one day, without anyone fully understanding when it happened, a town has become a city. Babylon's mud brick walls may have seemed vulnerable beside the stone monuments of other lands, but within them lay something astonishingly durable. Not the bricks themselves, for they cracked and crumbled, not the roofs, for they collapsed, not the plaster, for it flaked away into dust. What endured was the system, the urban idea, the conviction that through labor, law, ritual, writing, and command. Human beings could gather on a dangerous plane and create a world more ordered than nature had given them. From mud came walls, from walls came neighborhoods, from neighborhoods came institutions, from institutions came memory, and from memory came Babylon, the city that refused to remain only earth. In the long heat of the Mesopotamian plain, power did not arrive as an abstraction. It arrived as a man seated above others, surrounded by scribes, envoys, soldiers, petitioners, servants, and the invisible presence of gods. It arrived in the form of commands carried outward across canals and fields. It arrived in sealed tablets, forced labor, royal judgments, and armies moving beneath standards through the dust. Around 1800 B.C., that power gathered around Hammurabi. His name now stands among the most famous in the ancient world. But fame can flatten the dead. It can turn a ruler into a symbol, a lawgiver into a statue, a complex life into a single phrase. Hammurabi was not merely the man of the code. He was a political survivor in a world of rival cities, shifting alliances, dangerous neighbors, ambitious dynasts, and old gods who seemed to favor one kingdom, then another, with terrifying unpredictability. He inherited Babylon when it was important, but not yet supreme. Mesopotamia was not a blank map awaiting one master. It was crowded with memories and ambitions. Cities such as Larsa, Ejnuna, Mari, Assur, Isin, and others possessed their own rulers, their own gods, their own scribal traditions, their own claims to greatness. The land was fractured, but never simple. Kings sent letters filled with friendship and suspicion. Treaties were sworn, marriages were arranged, oaths were invoked before gods, spies listened, merchants carried rumor with their goods, armies waited. Hammurabi moved within this world carefully. For much of his reign, he appears not as a reckless conqueror, but as a patient builder of advantage. He strengthened the city. He managed diplomacy. He watched other powers strain against one another. He took opportunities when they came. Ancient kings rarely survived by courage alone. They survived by timing. They survived by knowing when to submit, when to flatter, when to threaten, when to strike, and when to let another king exhaust himself first. To understand Hammurabi, we must imagine the palace not as a quiet residence, but as a chamber of pressure. Messengers arriving from distant towns, reports of canal repairs, complaints from provincial governors, demands for troops, disputes over borders, warnings of enemy movements, requests from temples, tax assessments, harvest estimates, legal petitions, diplomatic gifts, omens interpreted by specialists. Each tablet placed before royal eyes was a small piece of a larger storm. The king had to appear more than competent. He had to appear chosen. In Mesopotamian thought, kingship was never merely human administration. It existed beneath divine sanction. The ruler's success confirmed heavenly favor. His failure suggested cosmic disorder, personal sin, ritual neglect, or divine anger. A king who lost battles, failed to maintain canals, ignored temples, or allowed injustice to spread, risked more than political weakness. He risked becoming the point where the universe itself seemed to fracture. So Hammurabi presented himself as shepherd. The image mattered. A shepherd guides, protects, feeds, restrains, and watches. In royal language, the people were not equal citizens in a modern sense. They were a flock entrusted to a ruler by the gods. It is an image both tender and controlling. The shepherd guards against wolves, but he also owns the staff. He leads the flock to water, but he decides the path. He speaks of care, yet his authority is unquestioned. This is the world that produced Hammurabi's reputation for justice. But justice in ancient Babylon was not soft. It was carved from hierarchy, fear, compensation, punishment, oath, family duty, and social rank. It sought balance, but balance did not mean equality. It sought order, and order meant that every person had a place, every property a boundary, every injury a value, every oath a sacred danger, every debt a consequence. A society of farmers, traders, soldiers, priests, wives, widows, slaves, craftsmen, and officials required rules sharp enough to cut through endless dispute. A king who could claim to impose such order gained immense symbolic power. Yet Hammurabi's greatness did not rest only on law. His reign became transformative because he eventually broke the political map around him. Through war and diplomacy, Babylon expanded. Rival cities were defeated or absorbed. The kingdom stretched its influence across territories that had once obeyed other thrones. What had begun as a city-state became the center of a larger realm. Babylon's god, its scribes, its officials, its measures, its royal commands, and its political imagination traveled farther than before. Conquest, however, is never simply a line drawn on a map. It is the movement of bodies and grain. It is the taking of hostages. It is the appointment of governors. It is the redistribution of land. It is the seizure of temples, arsenals, storehouses, and archives. It is the humiliation of defeated rulers. It is the fear of revolt in newly conquered towns. It is letters sent in haste, troops quartered among strangers, tribute demanded from fields already burdened by flood or drought. Empire is not only glory. Empire is administration under strain. Hammurabi had to make victory durable. This required scribes, more than swords alone. Scribes made rule extend across distance. They recorded orders, copied letters, measured fields, registered labor, listed rations, tracked deliveries, and preserved judgments. In the ancient Near East, writing was not merely literature, it was statecraft made visible. Each tablet was a small administrative miracle, a fragment of authority hardened in clay. It required roads and waterways. It required loyal officials. It required temples that accepted the new order or were compelled to live within it. It required ritual. The conquered had to understand that Babylon's rise was not only military luck, but part of a divine arrangement. A king who controlled cities without controlling meaning ruled only half a kingdom. Hammurabi's Babylon therefore became a theater of legitimacy. The royal image had to reach people who would never stand in the king's presence. They might know him through decrees, tax collectors, military officers, temple ceremonies, and legal decisions. They might hear his name invoked in oaths. They might see goods redistributed in his name. They might curse him when labor was demanded and praise him when a canal was restored. To most, the king was both distant and intimate, absent from daily life yet embedded in its obligations. Picture a petitioner approaching a local authority under Babylonian rule. Perhaps a field boundary has been moved. Perhaps a debt is disputed. Perhaps an adopted son has failed in duty. Perhaps a hired worker has not been paid. The matter may be small in the eyes of empire, but to the petitioner it is survival. Law and kingship meet in that moment. The grandeur of Babylon narrows into a single question. Will order protect me, or will power consume me? This was the promise Hammurabi wanted the world to believe, that the king stood between the weak and the violent, that divine justice moved through his throne, that Babylon did not merely conquer, but corrected. Such claims are never innocent. They are political weapons, yet they are not meaningless either. Ancient rulers understood something that remains true. Raw force cannot hold society forever. Power must tell a story about why obedience is right. Hammurabi told that story with unusual success. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden inside the machinery of his reign. We know the public image because rulers preserved public images. We know victories because kings wished victories remembered. We know laws because stone and clay survived. But the whispered anxieties of the court, the resentments of defeated cities, the doubts of soldiers, the grief of families whose sons were taken for campaigns, the private exhaustion of scribes copying order after order, these are harder to recover. The archaeological record offers fragments. Administrative tablets reveal systems. Letters reveal urgency. Foundation deposits reveal royal piety. City layers reveal building, destruction, and repair. But Hammurabi, the person, remains partly veiled. Did he believe fully in the divine language of his power? Did he lie awake considering rebellion, drought, betrayal, and death? Did he see Babylon as destiny? Or did destiny become visible only after his enemies had fallen? Only time will tell what future discoveries will be made. What can be said is that under Hammurabi, Babylon crossed a threshold. It became more than a city blessed by geography and labor. It became the heart of a political vision. The world around it could be measured, judged, tasked, commanded, punished, and folded into a single royal order. The city's name began to swell beyond its walls. In the end, Hammurabi's genius lay not merely in conquest, not merely in law, not merely in piety, but in the fusion of all three. He understood, or inherited, a tradition that understood that civilization at scale required a sacred grammar of command. The gods gave kingship, the king gave law, the law gave order, order gave fields, temples, markets, families, and armies the structure in which they could endure. A man sat upon the throne of Babylon. Around him moved scribes with clay, soldiers with spears, priests with offerings, farmers with grain, merchants with silver, and petitioners with fear in their hearts. Through him, the city began to speak as if it were the center of the world. There are few objects from the ancient world more commanding than a tall stone monument covered in law. Imagine it rising in a public place, dark and polished, its surface crowded with columns of tiny signs. At the top, the king stands before the divine. The human ruler receives authority from a power greater than himself. Beneath that sacred image, the words descend like rain hardened into stone. They speak of wages, fields, injuries, marriages, houses, slaves, merchants, boats, daughters, sons, oxen, builders, thieves, debtors, accusers, and the dead. This is not law as an idea floating in the mind. This is law made physical. A stone monument cannot settle every dispute in a kingdom. Most people could not simply stand before it and read its signs with ease. Many could not read at all. Yet its existence mattered deeply. It announced that justice had a body. It could be seen, approached, copied, invoked, feared, and remembered. It declared that royal order was not a passing mood. It had been carved into a substance far harder than clay, harder than brick, harder than the breath of any single judge. The law stele was a theater of authority. At its summit, the image is not decoration. It is a political statement written in divine language. The king does not claim authority from victory alone, nor from wealth, nor from inheritance alone. He stands beneath the gaze of a god, receiving the signs of rule. The implication is vast. To resist the king's justice is not merely to resist a man, it is to strain against the arrangement of the cosmos. Yet the laws themselves are startlingly practical. They descend from heaven into the mess of daily life. What happens if a house collapses and kills the owner? What happens if a man accuses another without proof? What happens when a hired worker fails, when a boatman loses goods, when a field is neglected, when a wife is wronged, when a son rebels, when a slave flees, when an ox gores, when a builder is careless, when a merchant entrusts silver to an agent and the account does not balance? This is where the grandeur of Babylon becomes intimate. The city was advanced not only because it dreamed in monumental terms, but because it tried to regulate ordinary disaster. Every society suffers injury, theft, betrayal, negligence, hunger, jealousy, violence, and uncertainty. Babylon's achievement lay in its attempt to drag such chaos into categories, to name the offense, to identify the rank of the persons involved, to assign compensation or punishment, to place the decision within a recognized order that outlived the anger of the moment. The code reveals a world where evidence mattered. An accusation could not float unsupported forever. Oaths were dangerous because the gods were believed to hear them. Witnesses mattered because memory required guardians. Documents mattered because clay could hold what speech might later distort. A transaction recorded before witnesses was more than a private agreement. It became part of the legal architecture of the city. Writing, oath, seal, and witness formed a chain, and that chain could bind human conduct. But the code also reveals a world far from modern ideals. Punishment could be severe. Bodies could answer for bodies. Social rank shaped consequence. The injury of a man of high status and the injury of someone lower in the hierarchy might not carry the same legal weight. A slave could be treated as property and person at once, protected in some situations, brutalized in others, valued in silver, pursued when fleeing, marked by ownership. Women could hold rights in certain circumstances, manage property, receive dowries, enter contracts, and seek redress. Yet their lives were heavily governed by patriarchal expectations and family control. The law did not abolish inequality. It organized it. That may be the hardest truth for modern listeners. Ancient legal sophistication did not necessarily mean moral softness. A society can be brilliant in procedure and harsh in judgment. It can protect widows in one clause and terrify wives in another. It can restrain violent men while preserving structures that keep others dependent. It can speak beautifully of defending the weak while still defining weakness through status, gender, age, and ownership. This is why the law stele must be approached with caution. It is not a full constitution. It is not a complete law book in the modern sense. It is not a window through which we can see every courtroom exactly as it functioned. It is also royal propaganda, a carefully arranged declaration of what the king wished to claim. Yet propaganda becomes powerful only when it speaks to real concerns. The stele may exaggerate royal justice, but it does so because justice mattered. People feared arbitrary power. They feared false accusation. They feared debt. They feared losing land, children, inheritance, reputation, and bodily safety. A law monument is born from anxiety. Consider the clauses about builders. A house in a mud-brick city was more than shelter. It was wealth, lineage, status, storage, and survival. If a builder constructed badly and the house collapsed, disaster could swallow an entire family. The code responds with terrifying severity. Behind that severity lies a recognition that urban life depends upon trust in unseen labor. The owner cannot inspect every hidden weakness in every wall. The builder's skill stands between the household and death. Law steps in where trust alone is not enough. The same is true of merchants and agents. Trade requires absence. Goods move away from the owner's eyes. Silver changes hands. Caravans depart. Boats vanish around river bends. Agents act in distant markets. Without records and penalties, commerce becomes a gamble against memory and honesty. The law tries to create reliability across distance. It recognizes that an advanced city lives through people who cannot personally know or watch one another. Debt, too, haunted the Babylonian world. A bad harvest could push a family into borrowing. Interest could accumulate. Fields could be pledged. Children could be sent into service. Freedom could narrow season by season until survival itself became a contract. Laws concerning debt are not dry technicalities. They are evidence of a society where weather, crop yield, illness, and obligation could drag households toward ruin. Every debt tablet held a story of need, hope, pressure, and fear. Marriage law reveals another dimension of the city's structure. Marriage was not only romance, though affection surely existed beyond our documents. It was property transfer, alliance, reproduction, inheritance, social legitimacy, and household continuity. Dowry, bride wealth, divorce, adultery, fertility, adoption, and widowhood all mattered because the family was the basic engine of economic and social life. The law enters the bedroom because the household was never merely private. It was where property, labor, descent, and honor were produced. Adoption could be equally serious. In a world where lineage secured care in old age, inheritance, ritual continuity, and property transmission, adoption was not sentimental alone. It was legal engineering. A child might be adopted to preserve a household, provide labor, continue family rights, or guarantee support for aging parents. The Code's attention to such matters reminds us that ancient people were not vague about kinship. They understood family as both emotion and institution. And then there is the principle that has echoed most loudly through history, the notion that injury may be answered by equivalent injury. To many modern minds, it sounds savage. Yet in its ancient setting, it may also represent limitation. Vengeance can spiral without boundary. A wound can become a feud. A feud can become generations of killing. By defining response, the law attempts to contain retaliation within a public framework. The result remains harsh, but it is not meaningless cruelty. It is the state claiming control over revenge. This is the deeper pattern. The Code pulls violence, trade, sexuality, labor, property, and family into the orbit of royal order. Nothing important is left entirely outside. The king's justice reaches into the market, the field, the workshop, the home, the courtroom, the canal bank, and the grave. Law becomes a netcast over society. Some are caught for protection. Some are caught for punishment. Some are caught because the system needs them to remain in place. The crown and the code therefore belong together. The crown without law is only domination. Law without the crown has no force. In Babylon, the king claimed to join them under divine approval. He presented himself as the guardian of boundaries, the judge of disputes, the avenger of wrongs, and the protector of the vulnerable. Whether every village, every official, every courtroom, and every powerful household lived by that ideal is another question entirely. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden. We do not hear the voice of the widow who stood before a judge, hoping the written order would protect her. We do not hear the slave bargaining silently with fate. We do not hear the builder's defense, the merchant's panic, the debtor's shame, the wife's fear, the son's resentment, or the judge's private doubts. The law speaks in categories, but life occurs in trembling detail. And yet, these categories are enough to show us a civilization of astonishing complexity. Babylon did not merely build high, it thought deeply about consequence. It understood that a city could not survive on walls and grain alone. It needed predictable judgment. It needed a language for harm. It needed procedures for trust. It needed the terrible reassurance that someone, somewhere, had the authority to say what must be done when the fragile agreements of life broke apart. On stone, the king placed his vision of order. In courts, homes, fields, and markets, people discovered what that order meant. The monument still stands in the imagination like a dark doorway into the ancient mind. Behind it lies not a simple world of cruelty or wisdom, but something far more human. A society struggling, with all its brilliance and brutality, to prevent itself from falling back into chaos. Inside Babylon, knowledge had weight. It could be held in the hand as a damp tablet. It could be pressed beneath a seal. It could be stacked in baskets, dried in the sun, stored on shelves, copied by students, carried by messengers, archived in temples, or buried by collapse until the earth itself became a library. In this city of mud brick and river light, thought was not invisible. It took shape in clay. The scribe was one of the great figures of the Babylonian world. Not a king, not a priest in the highest sanctuary, not always a warrior or nobleman. Yet the scribe belonged to the machinery by which civilization remembered itself. He knew the signs. He knew numbers, formulas, contracts, lists, letters, hymns, omens, weights, measures, and the formal phrases through which authority spoke. Where most people carried memory in speech, song, custom, and witness, the scribe could trap speech before it vanished. To become such a person required training. Imagine a young student seated in a tablet house, perhaps sweating in the heat, his fingers stained with clay, his body restless, his mind forced into discipline. Before him lies a model text, beside it a lump of prepared clay. The teacher speaks, the student copies. At first the signs are awkward, lines too deep, wedges crooked, spacing uneven, a name misspelled, a number mistaken. The tablet is corrected, scolded, smoothed, and tried again. Cuneiform was not alphabetic simplicity. It was a demanding script born from centuries of use, adaptation, and inheritance. Its wedge-shaped signs carried sounds, words, categories, numbers, and traditions older than Babylon's rise. To master it was to enter a long intellectual lineage, one that joined present administrators to the older cities of Mesopotamia and to the sacred authority of written knowledge. Every sign mattered. A wrong number could change a debt. A wrong name could confuse an inheritance. A wrong measurement could alter a field boundary. A wrong phrase in a royal letter could insult an ally or weaken a command. Writing was power, precisely because writing could be trusted, copied, challenged, and preserved. The scribe's hand sat at the meeting point of law, economy, religion, and memory. In the archives of Babylonian life, the world becomes almost painfully detailed. There are tablets for loans of silver and grain, tablets for land sales, tablets for hiring laborers, tablets for marriage arrangements, tablets for adoption, tablets for lawsuits, tablets for rations, tablets for livestock, tablets for temple offerings, tablets for letters between officials, tablets that record the movement of goods so ordinary that no poet would have sung of them, yet without which the city could not function. This is the marvel of bureaucracy. It seems dull only from a distance. In reality, bureaucracy is one of the foundations of large human society. It allows strangers to coordinate. It allows obligations to survive absence. It allows the palace to know what entered a storehouse months earlier. It allows temples to count offerings. It allows a creditor to demand repayment. It allows a widow to prove a claim. It allows the state to reach beyond the range of a human voice. Babylon was advanced because it could count. Counting is not a small thing. To count is to compare the world with an imagined order. It is to say that 10 jars are expected, 9 have arrived, and 1 is missing. It is to say that a field has a measured size, that a worker is owed a ration, that interest accumulates at a certain rate, that time can be divided, that labor can be scheduled, that the moon's phases can be observed, that grain can be converted into value, and value into silver. The Babylonians inherited and refined mathematical traditions of extraordinary sophistication. They worked with systems based on 60, a numerical inheritance still alive whenever modern people count 60 seconds in a minute or 360 degrees in a circle. Their tablets show calculations of areas, volumes, reciprocals, squares, and practical problems involving fields, ramps, bricks, and labor. This was not idle abstraction alone. It was mathematics under the pressure of administration, building, trade, and astronomy. A field had to be surveyed. A canal had to be planned. A wall required bricks. A worker required rations. A loan produced interest. A calendar organized ritual. Numbers bound the city together in invisible cords. The sky, too, became part of this system of knowledge. Babylonian observers watched the heavens with a patience that now seems almost superhuman. Night after night, generation after generation, they tracked celestial patterns. The moon's movement, the appearance of planets, eclipses, seasonal cycles, and the strange order of stars mattered because the heavens were thought to speak. To observe the sky was not merely to study nature, it was to listen for divine warning. The boundary between astronomy and divination was not clear in the ancient mind. To us, science and omen may seem opposed. To the Babylonian scholar, careful observation could serve sacred interpretation. A darkening moon, an unusual planetary position, a storm at the wrong time, a malformed birth, all might belong to a network of signs through which the gods revealed danger. The intellectual act was not foolish. It required classification, comparison, record-keeping, and disciplined attention. The assumption behind it was different from our own, but the labor of observation was real. This is where ancient knowledge becomes most fascinating. The Babylonians were not modern scientists hiding in ancient clothes, nor were they ignorant dreamers lost in superstition. They inhabited a different map of reality, one in which numbers, gods, stars, kings, animals, cities, rivers, and human choices were woven into a single meaningful fabric. Their scholars could be exacting and mystical at the same time. They could calculate and fear. They could measure and pray. Clay tablets preserve this dual mind. On one tablet, the clean order of accounts. On another, a student exercise. On another, a legal dispute. On another, an omen series. On another, a hymn. On another, a mathematical problem. The archive refuses simple categories. Babylonian civilization did not divide life into the neat boxes favored by modern thought. Knowledge served survival, rule, ritual, memory, profit, and cosmic anxiety all at once. The tablet house was therefore a gateway into power. Students trained there might one day serve palace, temple, merchant household, or local administration. They learned not only signs, but ways of thinking. Lists were central, lists of words, lists of professions, lists of gods, lists of cities, lists of animals, lists of stones, plants, stars, and objects. To list the world is to impose order upon it. It is to make reality searchable in the mind. It is to say that chaos can be named, sorted, and taught. There is something profound in this. A child copying signs in Babylon was participating in one of humanity's greatest revolutions. The movement from fleeting speech to external memory. The movement from what one person can remember to what an institution can preserve. The movement from local custom to written precedent. The movement from immediate exchange to recorded debt. The movement from watching the moon alone to contributing to a tradition of sky observation that would outlive many kings. But written knowledge could also imprison. A debt tablet could follow a family like a curse. A tax record could summon grain from a household already hungry. A labor list could pull men from fields to royal work. A legal document could preserve exclusion as firmly as protection. Writing amplified power. It did not choose kindness. It served whoever controlled the stylus, the archive, the seal, and the court. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden in the silence between tablets. The scribes recorded what their world considered worth recording. They did not write everything. The lullaby, the whispered insult, the private joke, the grief at a child's fever, the smell of a schoolroom, the anxiety before an examination, the pride of a clean tablet completed without error. These mostly escape us. The archive is immense, yet it is not complete. It is a net with holes through which most human life has passed. Even so, enough remains to astonish. Babylon was a city of scribes and numbers because it had become too complex for memory alone. Its markets, temples, courts, storehouses, schools, and royal offices required a second mind outside the human skull. Clay became that mind. It remembered what people owed, owned, promised, feared, measured, observed, and believed. In the end, the most advanced city is not only the one with the highest wall or richest palace, it is the one that learns to preserve thought beyond the death of the thinker. Babylon did this with river clay, reed stylus, trained hands, and relentless attention. And in those small wedge-shaped marks, impressed by people who never imagined us, the city still speaks. At the heart of Babylon stood a world within the world. It was not merely a cluster of shrines, nor a place where anxious people came only to whisper prayers and leave offerings. The sacred district was a living engine of the city, a place where grain, labor, land, ritual, astronomy, politics, music, fear, and divine presence gathered into one immense system. To modern eyes, religion is often imagined as belief, private and inward. In Babylon, religion was infrastructure. The temple was house, palace, storehouse, court, workshop, archive, and doorway to heaven. Its God was not an abstract idea. The God possessed a name, a personality, a household, a cult statue, garments, meals, festivals, attendants, lands, and rites. The divine image was washed, clothed, fed, praised, transported, concealed, revealed, and approached through ritual discipline. Priests did not think of themselves as tending a symbol only. They were serving a presence whose favor could sustain a city and whose anger could unmake it. Every morning, in the dimness of sacred rooms, ritual time began again. Doors opened, lamps flickered, incense thickened the air, water was poured, hands were purified, words were spoken in forms inherited from deep antiquity. Offerings were brought with care, because careless worship was dangerous. The temple kitchen prepared food for the divine household. Musicians and chanters gave sound to reverence. Officials inspected goods. Scribes recorded what entered and what left. The God's life, as humans understood it, required administration. This is one of the great mysteries of ancient urbanism. The gods did not stand outside the economy. They were among its greatest owners. Temples held fields, herds, workshops, laborers, storerooms, precious objects, and long memories. Their estates produced grain, wool, oil, beer, cloth, and other goods. Their doors received offerings from kings and commoners alike. Their archives preserved accounts with the same cold precision found in palace records. Sacred power and material wealth were braided together so tightly that pulling them apart would have made no sense to those who lived there. A temple courtyard might be filled not only with silence, but with movement. Porters carrying baskets, scribes bending over tablets, bakers working near ovens, brewers measuring ingredients, shepherds reporting animals, weavers producing textiles, priests preparing ritual objects, petitioners waiting for access, messengers arriving with sealed instructions. The holy place was alive with labor. The divine household was also an economic institution, and the economy itself was touched by divine obligation. Yet the temple's deepest power was not merely wealth, it was meaning. Babylonian society believed that the visible world was surrounded by invisible intention. A failed harvest might not be only bad weather. A sickness might not be only bodily weakness. A defeat in war might not be only strategy gone wrong. Behind events lay signs, displeasure, warnings, forgotten vows, broken rituals, offended gods, hostile demons, ancestral disturbances, or forces that had to be interpreted by specialists. The temple gave the city a language for living inside uncertainty. Priests and scholars were experts in dangerous knowledge. Some knew the calendar of rites, some knew hymns and lamentations, some studied omens, Some examined the livers of sacrificed animals, searching the folds and markings of flesh for divine messages. Some watched the heavens. Some performed purification rituals. Some recited incantations against illness, misfortune, and unseen harm. These figures did not operate at the margins of reason in their own world. They were technicians of sacred order. The omen scholar looking at the sky was not a fool staring blankly into night. He was part of a long tradition of observation, classification, comparison, and interpretation. The universe was readable but not easily. It required trained eyes, a strange cloud, an eclipse, the behavior of a planet, the cry of an animal, the shape of oil poured on water. All could be taken into patterns. The gods, it was believed, had written warning into the fabric of events, and the scholar's duty was to read before disaster fully arrived. This gave knowledge a terrible urgency. A king might ask whether to march. A priest might warn that the signs were unfavorable. Rituals might be performed to divert danger. Substitute figures might be used in moments of extreme celestial threat, when the king himself was believed to be under divine menace. The boundary between politics and ritual was porous. Decisions of state could tremble beneath interpretations of the heavens. In Babylon, no throne was safe without the gods. The king needed temple support, ritual legitimacy, and divine approval. He restored sanctuaries, provided offerings, claimed to act under command from above, and presented victories as signs of favor. But the relationship was never simple. Temples possessed their own authority, their own personnel, their own property, and their own traditions. A ruler might patronize them, but he also had to manage them. Sacred institutions could strengthen royal power, yet they could also preserve memories older than any dynasty. The great tower, rising in the imagination of Babylon, belonged to this sacred logic. A stage temple tower was not a tower in the modern sense of vanity alone. It was an artificial mountain in a flat land, a raised meeting place between earth and sky. Its terraces lifted ritual space above the human plane. In a world without natural peaks nearby, architecture created ascent. Brick became mountain. Labor became cosmology. Height became theology. To stand beneath such a structure would have been to feel the city's ambition in sacred form. The lower world of lanes, markets, animals, and dust gathered around a vertical axis. Above, the realm of gods was approached through platform, staircase, ritual, and restricted access. Not everyone could climb, not everyone could enter. Sacred space was graded, guarded, and organized. The temple was open to society in some ways, but profoundly closed in others. Mystery gave it power. Festivals broke that hiddenness open. On certain days, the god might leave the inner sanctuary. Processions moved through streets, statues, standards, priests, singers, officials, and crowds transformed urban space into ritual theater. The city watched itself become sacred. Ordinary roads became divine pathways. The crowd did not merely attend an event, it participated in the renewal of order. The gods' movement affirmed the city's place in the cosmos. Imagine such a procession in the heat and noise of Babylon. The press of bodies, children lifted to see, dust rising beneath sandals, musicians sounding out rhythm, priests moving with controlled gravity, the scent of incense and sweat, officials keeping order, women watching from doorways and roofs, the divine image hidden veiled, carried, or glimpsed in splendor. For one charged moment, the city's many divisions were gathered around a shared center of awe. Yet sacred power could be frightening. The gods were not comforting in a simple sense. They could protect, but also punish. They could grant kingship, then withdraw it. They could send omens too obscure for comfort. They could demand rituals few understood. They could be offended by neglect or impurity. To live under their gaze was to live in a universe full of meaning, but also full of peril. This is why Babylon's temples mattered so deeply. They helped hold fear in form. They provided procedures for crisis. They turned dread into offerings, impurity into purification, uncertainty into divination, guilt into lamentation, gratitude into sacrifice, kingship into sacred duty, and time into festival. They were not simply buildings inside the city. They were mechanisms by which the city believed itself able to survive contact with the divine. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden behind the lost doors of sanctuaries. We can study temple plans, offerings, tablets, seals, dedicatory inscriptions, ritual texts, and layers of rebuilding. We can analyze residues, foundations, and the distribution of sacred objects. We can reconstruct parts of ceremony, parts of economy, parts of belief. But the actual sensation of standing in the dark before the god, hearing the chant rise, smelling the oil and incense, feeling terror and devotion in the same breath, that remains beyond full recovery. Perhaps this is why Babylon still compels us. It reminds us that the ancient city was not built by economics alone. It was built by metaphysics, by the belief that heaven had weight in human affairs, by the conviction that order must be renewed through ritual, or the world might slip toward chaos, by the strange and magnificent idea that a city of mud brick could host immortal powers. In Babylon, temples were not escapes from reality. They were the places where reality was negotiated. Babylon breathed through its markets. At first light, when the heat had not yet hardened the air, movement gathered near the river landings, gateways, courtyards, and open spaces where goods could be inspected, weighed, argued over, taxed, and carried away. Boats nudged the banks with cargo wrapped in reed matting. Donkeys stamped in dust. Porters bent beneath loads. Traders lifted cloth to show its weave. Officials watched seals and measures. Buyers touched, smelled, questioned, doubted, and calculated. A city cannot live by majesty alone. It must eat. It must clothe itself. It must repair tools, supply workshops, feed animals, fill jars, brew beer, grind grain, bake bread, sharpen blades, patch sandals, replace baskets, and keep oil flowing into lamps. The market was where the enormous sacred and royal systems of Babylon descended into human need. It was where ambition became price, where distant landscapes became objects in the hand, and where the world beyond the horizon entered the city one bundle at a time. The most common goods were not glamorous, but they were everything. Barley stood at the center of life. It fed people, animals, wages, debts, rations, and offerings. It could be measured, stored, loaned, brewed, taxed, and converted in the mind into value. Grain was not simply food, it was a language of obligation. A worker might receive rations in barley. A debtor might owe barley. A temple might collect barley. A household might survive or fail according to what barley remained in its jars when the hungry season lengthened. Beside grain came dates, oil, wool, leather, fish, beer, onions, garlic, reeds, pottery, and textiles. The smell would have been overwhelming. River mud, animal dung, hot bodies, fresh bread, beer mash, wool grease, fish, smoke, sesame oil, leather, dust, and sweat. Ancient cities were not silent marble worlds. They were loud, close, pungent, and alive. To enter a Babylonian market was to step into a storm of voices, bargaining, complaint, laughter, suspicion, oath, command, prayer, and insult all mingled beneath the same sun. Yet behind the apparent chaos lay systems of remarkable precision. Weights mattered, measures mattered, seals mattered, witnesses mattered. Silver functioned as a major standard of value. Though it did not always pass from hand to hand like modern coinage, it could be weighed out in pieces, accounted for, promised, owed, and compared against goods. The marketplace depended on trust, but trust was reinforced by tools, balance scales, standard weights, sealed containers, written contracts, and known witnesses turned exchange into something more durable than memory. A merchant did not merely sell, he navigated risk. He had to consider transport, spoilage, theft, dishonest agents, fluctuating supply, political instability, river conditions, credit, temple demands, palace intervention, and the moods of foreign cities. A cargo that promised profit at departure could become disaster by arrival. A delayed boat could ruin a contract. A caravan could be intercepted. A partner could deny receipt. A debt could remain unpaid because a harvest failed far away. This is why trade required paperwork. The clay tablet was as necessary to commerce as the boat and pack animal. It recorded loans, partnerships, deliveries, deposits, purchases, and disputes. It transformed an agreement into an object. A man might die, lie, flee, forget, or change his story. Clay did not forget so easily. With witnesses and seals, it allowed the market to stretch beyond the limits of face-to-face trust. Babylon's merchants were not wandering romantics outside society. Many belonged to dense networks of household, palace, temple, and private enterprise. Some acted on behalf of institutions. Some used family connections. Some dealt in local goods, others in long-distance exchange. The city's commercial life was not a single free market in the modern sense, nor a simple command economy. It was a layered world where royal authority, temple property, private initiative, credit, custom, and legal enforcement all overlapped. The result was extraordinary. From the plain of southern Mesopotamia, Babylon reached outward for things its own land could not easily provide. Timber from distant mountains, stone from regions beyond the alluvium, metals from faraway sources, precious objects, fine woods, rare stones, and luxury goods moved through long chains of exchange. By the time such materials entered Babylon, they carried not only value, but distance. They were proof that the city had gravitational force. A piece of imported stone in a land of mud brick was more than stone. It was connection. It told of miners, carvers, traders, boatmen, pack animals, mountain tracks, river routes, border officials, danger, desire, and wealth. It reminded the viewer that Babylon did not stand alone. The city was a node in a vast ancient web linking highlands, deserts, river valleys, ports, and kingdoms. Every foreign material in the archaeological record is a footprint of contact. Every sealed impression may hint at administration. Every imported object asks how many hands touched it before it came to rest in Babylonian dust. Textiles were among the great engines of this world. Wool moved through households, workshops, temples, and trade networks. Sheep produced fleece. Women and men cleaned, spun, wove, dyed, folded, stored, issued, and sold cloth. Textiles clothed bodies, paid workers, supplied temples, equipped armies, and traveled as exchange goods. Yes, because cloth decays, it often vanishes from the archaeological record, leaving behind tools, tablets, and traces. Yet in life it was everywhere, wrapped around bodies, stacked in storerooms, displayed in markets, carried on boats, offered to gods, and counted by scribes. Beer, too, belonged to the economy of daily survival. It was nourishment, refreshment, ration, ritual offering, and social bond. Brewing required grain, water, labor, containers, storage, and skill. A cup of beer was not merely pleasure, it was agriculture transformed, labor measured, and community enacted. In taverns and households, people drank, negotiated, listened, flirted, quarreled, and exchanged news. The marketplace did not end where the stall ended. It spilled into streets, courtyards, workshops, and drinking places where information moved as quickly as goods. Women were deeply present in this commercial life. They appear in documents as buyers, sellers, lenders, borrowers, property holders, priestesses, tavern keepers, textile workers, and members of powerful households. Their legal and social positions were constrained by the patriarchal order. But constraint is not absence. In the living city, women managed resources, negotiated obligations, supervised labor, and shaped household economies. The archive gives only glimpses, but those glimpses are enough to break the illusion of a world run only by kings and male officials. Slaves and dependent laborers also moved through the economy. Some were born into servitude. Some were captured. Some fell into debt. Some worked in households, fields, workshops, or institutions. They could be bought, sold, pledged, inherited, and pursued if they fled. Yet their lives were not all identical. Some possessed skills. Some handled goods. Some formed families. Some appeared in contracts. The market could treat human beings as value, and that fact remains one of the darker foundations beneath urban brilliance. An advanced city can be built upon suffering. Babylon's prosperity was not pure. It depended on hierarchy, extraction, unpaid or coerced labor, unequal access to law, and the ability of powerful institutions to draw surplus from fields and people. The market's energy should not blind us to the pressure behind it. Every gleaming luxury object has a shadow. Someone mined, hauled, spun, dug, rode, harvested, counted, guarded, or paid the cost. Even so, markets also created possibility. They allowed movement between households, contact between strangers, circulation of news, and the accumulation of wealth outside purely royal command. A clever trader might rise, a family might secure land, a craft worker might find patrons, a widow might enforce a claim, a lender might become powerful, a debtor might recover. Markets are places of vulnerability, but also places of strategy. In Babylon, the marketplace was one of the great arenas where ordinary people confronted the machinery of civilization and tried to bend it towards survival. Picture the river dock as the day deepens. The sun grows fierce. Shadows shrink. A boatman argues over damage to jars. A scribe presses names into clay. A merchant weighs silver with narrowed eyes. A woman examines wool. A porter wipes dust from his face. A child tries to steal a date and is slapped away. A priest's servant collects goods for temple use. A soldier watches, bored and dangerous. Someone swears by a god that the measure is fair. Someone else does not believe him. In such scenes, Babylon becomes real. Not the city of legend alone, not the city of kings alone, but the city of transactions. The city where human need met human cunning. The city where a jar of oil, a length of cloth, a handful of silver, or a tablet of debt could alter the shape of a life. The city where the world arrived in fragments and was absorbed into Babylonian order. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden among the lost stalls and vanished voices. We can recover weights, seals, tablets, jars, storerooms, workshops, and trade goods. We can trace patterns of exchange and estimate networks of supply. But we cannot fully hear the bargaining voices, the private anxieties, the satisfaction of a profitable day, the humiliation of being cheated, the hunger that forced a family to sell what it loved, or the thrill of seeing foreign goods brought from beyond the known horizon. The marketplace has vanished, but its logic remains familiar. Human beings still gather to exchange need for value, trust for risk, labor for survival, and desire for objects. Babylon's markets remind us that civilization is not only built in temples and palaces, it is built wherever people measure, promise, haggle, carry, record, and hope. On the banks of the Euphrates, the ancient world came to buy and sell, and in the noise of that exchange, Babylon became vast. To understand Babylon, we must leave the throne room, the temple court, the scribal school, and the shouting market, and step into the neighborhoods where most lives unfolded. Here, greatness had a smaller scale. It lived behind mud-brick walls, in rooms arranged around courtyards, in roof spaces open to the night, in storage jars half buried in floors, in hearth ash, worn thresholds, patched plaster, and narrow lanes where neighbors knew too much about one another. The city that dazzles from a distance becomes intimate when entered through a household door. Its empire of law, trade, ritual, and writing resolves into the basic human questions of bread, sleep, marriage, illness, labor, birth, debt, and death. A Babylonian house was not just shelter. It was a family archive, an economic unit, a workshop, a place of cooking and weaving, a storage center, a legal identity, and often a sacred space in miniature. Its walls held the living, but also memory. Here children learned the gestures of their world. Here elders sat in shade. Here women managed grain, oil, cloth, servants, children, and obligations. Here men returned from fields, offices, canals, workshops, courts, or journeys. Here marriages were negotiated into daily endurance. Here quarrels rose, softened, or became legal disputes. The house gathered the city into itself. A jar in the corner might contain grain received as ration, payment, harvest share, or loan. A textile on a peg might represent hours of spinning and weaving, or wealth held in portable form. A sealed tablet stored carefully within the home might prove a purchase, a dowry, a debt, an adoption, or an inheritance. A small figurine or amulet might mark fear of sickness, childbirth danger, spirits, or misfortune. The household was where the public systems of Babylon touched skin. Much of life happened in the courtyard, This open space brought air and light into the home. It was a place for grinding grain, preparing food, talking, working, drying goods, receiving selected visitors, and moving between rooms. In the heat, shade mattered. In the evening, rooftops mattered. The rhythm of the house followed the sky, the seasons, the demands of work, and the exhausting practicalities of staying alive in a crowded city built of clay. The sounds would have been constant: grinding stones, infants crying, loom weights clicking, dogs barking, donkeys calling, neighbors arguing beyond a wall, water poured into jars, bread slapped into ovens, someone coughing, someone singing quietly, someone reciting a prayer, someone calling for a child who had wandered into the lane. The ordinary city was not grand silence. It was layered noise, human and animal, softened by walls and amplified by closeness. Smell shaped life as much as sound. Fresh bread, stale beer, sweat, smoke, oil, wool, dust, damp clay, drains, animals, cooked onions, fish, and the heavy odor of bodies in hot weather. Ancient urban living required tolerance of discomforts modern people often forget. Waste had to be managed, but not erased. Water had to be carried, stored, and protected. Food spoiled. Insects came. Illness moved through households with frightening speed. A city concentrated opportunity, but it also concentrated risk. Children grew inside this density. They played in courtyards and lanes, imitated adult work, carried small objects, watched rituals, feared discipline, learned kinship, status, and obligation before they could name them. Some boys from families with means might enter scribal training. Some girls learned household management, textile production, ritual duties, and the expectations of marriage. Many children worked early. Many died young. The archaeological and textual traces of childhood are often faint. Yet every ancient city was full of children, their voices rising between walls, now collapsed into dust. Women's lives were varied, constrained, essential, and often only partially visible. A woman might grind grain, manage servants, weave textiles, supervise stores, bear children, negotiate with traders, hold property, participate in contracts, serve in religious roles, run a tavern, lend goods, or fight for her rights through family and legal channels. Some women lived within wealthy households where they commanded labor. Others endured dependence, violence, poverty, and vulnerability. The documents often speak when something has gone wrong or when property is at stake, leaving tenderness and ordinary competence mostly unrecorded. Marriage shaped the household's future. It brought together families, goods, expectations, and risks. A bride entered a new arrangement of duty and protection, but also exposure. Dowry could be security, wealth, memory of her natal household, and legal safeguard. Fertility mattered intensely, not only for affection, but for inheritance, labor, old age support, and ritual continuity. A childless marriage could threaten property and lineage. Adoption, secondary wives, divorce, and legal negotiation all belonged to the hard architecture of family survival. Old age carried its own anxieties. To grow old in Babylon was to depend on household bonds, property arrangements, adult children, servants, or temple and community structures. A parent might adopt in exchange for care. Inheritance could be arranged to reward obedience or secure future support. Behind many legal documents lies fear of abandonment. The ancient family was not merely emotional. It was the nearest institution of welfare, memory, and burial. The dead did not simply disappear. In many Mesopotamian households, burial could occur beneath floors or within domestic space, binding ancestry to the architecture of the living. The presence of the dead under the house reminds us that the home was not only for those who breathed. It was a place where generations overlapped. A child might play above the remains of a grandparent. A family might pour offerings, speak names, and maintain bonds with those who had passed beyond sight. Death was feared, but also managed. The proper treatment of the dead mattered because the boundary between living and dead was not absolute. Neglected spirits could trouble the living. Remembered ancestors could remain part of household identity. Food, water, ritual attention, and name preservation helped maintain order between worlds. The ancient home therefore contained a private cosmology, one far smaller than the great temples, but no less serious to those who dwelt within it. Work entered every room. Textiles may have occupied countless hours. Wool had to be cleaned, spun, woven, dyed, folded, and stored. Grain had to be processed. Beer had to be brewed. Food had to be prepared. Tools had to be repaired. Children had to be watched. Animals had to be managed. The line between domestic labor and economic production was thin. A household could produce goods for its own survival, for obligations, for sale, or for institutions that demanded output. Servants and slaves were part of many households. Their presence complicates any warm image of family life. Some lived close to those they served, sharing food, space, and danger, yet without equal status. Some were skilled, trusted, and deeply embedded in domestic routines. Others were beaten, sold, pledged, or separated from loved ones. The house could be a place of affection for some and captivity for others. Babylonian domestic life, like Babylonian public life, contained brilliance and cruelty within the same walls. Urban neighborhoods created social knowledge. Neighbors heard arguments, witnessed agreements, helped in crisis, spread gossip, borrowed tools, watched children, and sometimes testified in disputes. Reputation mattered. A person known as dishonest, violent, careless, or immoral could suffer consequences beyond formal punishment. In a dense city, social life pressed hard. Privacy existed, but not in the modern sense. Walls could divide property, but they could not always silence life. Disease moved through these spaces with invisible authority. Babylonians had healing traditions, incantations, practical remedies, ritual specialists, and accumulated knowledge of symptoms. They treated illness through a blend of observation, plant and mineral preparations, magical speech, purification, and appeals to divine forces. To modern minds, these categories may seem separate. In Babylonian homes, they were part of a single struggle against suffering. When a fever rose or childbirth turned dangerous, a family needed every possible form of help. Food was the daily foundation: bread and beer, dates and onions, fish and oil, lentils, garlic, dairy when available, meat on rarer or special occasions for many households. Meals bound people together, but also revealed status: who ate first, who received the better portion, who drank from which vessel, who served and who was served. The domestic table was a map of hierarchy, affection, scarcity, and custom. At night, Babylon changed. The heat loosened. Roofs became living spices. Families may have slept under the sky when weather allowed. looking upward at stars that scholars elsewhere read for kings. Dogs barked in the lanes, lamps glowed behind doorways. A mother soothed a child. A man counted debts in his mind. A servant considered flight and feared capture. An old woman remembered a city that younger people never knew. Somewhere, a tablet dried containing the terms of a future dispute. Still, for the most part, secrets remain hidden behind the doors of ordinary houses. Excavation can recover plans, floors, ovens, drains, burials, pottery, tools, tablets, figurines, and traces of repair. It can show how space was used, where people cooked, stored, worked, and buried. But the emotional weather of a household is harder to preserve. Love rarely fossilizes. Resentment leaves no neat layer. Laughter does not survive in clay unless someone writes of it, and even then, only as a shadow. Yet the ordinary life of Babylon may be its greatest wonder. Not the king's law alone, not the temple tower alone, not the merchant's cargo alone, but the fact that thousands of human beings woke each day inside a vast urban system and made it function through small acts, carrying water, grinding grain, copying sign, sweeping courtyards, feeding children, repairing walls, paying debts, mourning the dead, preparing meals, whispering prayers, enduring heat, hoping for tomorrow. A city is not its monuments first. A city is its households. Babylon's greatness rested on people whose names are mostly gone, people who did not know they lived in legend, people whose work left fingerprints in clay, ash in ovens, wear on thresholds, and bones beneath floors. Their lives did not decorate history. Their lives were history. In the hidden rooms of Babylon, beneath roofs of reed and clay, the ancient world breathed one household at a time. On the southern plain, war was never far away. It waited beyond the cultivated fields, beyond the canals, beyond the last watchful settlements where the ordered world of barley, brick, and temple gave way to uncertainty. It came in the form of rival kings, raiding bands, ambitious generals, disputed borders, broken treaties, unpaid tribute, seized caravans, and cities that refused to accept another city's rise. Babylon's brilliance did not float above violence. It grew inside a world where violence was one of the great engines of politics. The land itself made conflict likely. In Mesopotamia, wealth depended upon water, fields, labor, storage, and routes of movement. A boundary was not just a line. It might decide who controlled irrigation, who received harvest, who taxed trade, who maintained a canal, who commanded a town, and which god received offerings. When rival cities looked across the plain, they were not merely seeing neighbors. They were seeing competing claims to survival. War was often fought long before armies met. It began in letters, oaths, marriages, gifts, insults, and delays. Envoys traveled between courts carrying polished words and hidden threats. One king called another brother while measuring his weakness. Alliances were sworn before gods, which made betrayal not only political, but sacredly dangerous. Daughters were sent into foreign palaces. Hostages could secure promises. Tribute might conceal submission beneath the language of friendship. Diplomacy was a battlefield of clay tablets. A royal letter could flatter, accuse, plead, warn, or maneuver. It might complain that troops had not arrived, that gifts were inadequate, that an ally had treated a messenger badly, that a border town had shifted loyalty, or that enemy forces were gathering. Every phrase mattered. Kings performed affection and suspicion at the same time. The ancient Near East was a world of intense correspondence, where power traveled through scribes as surely as through soldiers. But when diplomacy failed, men marched. A Babylonian army was not a modern machine, but it was organized enough to terrify. Its forces might include spearmen, archers, shield-bearers, chariot units in some contexts, levied troops, professional retainers, and contingents drawn from subject towns. Soldiers needed food, water, equipment, commanders, animals, transport, and discipline. To send an army across the plain was to set an entire logistical system in motion. The glory of battle began with administration. Grain had to be gathered, rations issued, weapons repaired, routes chosen, canals crossed, camps made, scouts sent, omens consulted, messages relayed, sick men replaced, desertion punished. The spear point visible in a warrior's hand was only the final expression of decisions made in storerooms, offices, temples, and palace courts. War was organized hunger, organized fear, organized labor, and organized killing. For the ordinary soldier, it may have felt very different from royal triumph. He marched in heat. Dust entered his mouth. Water became precious. Feet blistered. Armor and weapons chafed. The enemy was not an inscription, but another frightened man with a blade, a bow, or a spear. The battlefield was noise, confusion, pain, screams, commands, and the terrifying moment when formation met formation. Even in an age of kings who boasted of victory, war remained a human catastrophe, experienced one body at a time. Cities feared siege most of all. A walled city could resist, but walls also trapped. Behind gates, grain stores mattered more than courage. Wells, canals, morale, disease, and internal loyalty could decide survival. Attackers might cut fields, destroy orchards, divert water, burn outlying settlements, seize animals, and wait. A siege attacked the stomach before the wall. It turned time into a weapon. Imagine Babylon's defenders along mud-brick fortifications in a season of dread. Lookouts scanning the horizon, gatekeepers under command, families carrying valuables indoors, temple rituals intensifying, officials counting grain, rumors multiplying, a mother listening for news of a son beyond the walls, a merchant wondering whether his stored goods will be confiscated, a priest reading omens with hands that must not tremble, a commander calculating how long loyalty will last if bread grows scarce. The city was a fortress, but also a hostage to its own density. The same crowded life that made Babylon powerful made it vulnerable under pressure. So many mouths, so many dependencies,